Anti-racist requires more than just not being racist. It requires actively working to challenge racism and dismantle it in yourself, in others, and in society. I believe in this work because I think math prepares us with the critical thinking skills and courage needed to take on the world's biggest problems. I think math classes where we can build the emotional skill set needed to collaborate effectively with others and keep going when things get hard or feel uncomfortable. I'd like to introduce Arthur Powell, who is a professor of mathematics education at Rutgers University, Newark, as well as associate director of the Robert B. Davis Institute for Learning of the Graduate School of Education in New Brunswick, New Jersey. He directs the research group on communication, technology, and mathematics learning. His research interests include writing and mathematics learning, ethnomathematics, development of mathematical ideas and reasoning, teacher professional development, and collaborative problem solving in mathematics and technology. Arthur has taught in Brazil, China, Canada, Haiti, and Mozambique. He is also a T2T Global Board member and someone whom I look up to personally quite a bit.
Thank you.
That big intro.
You
just gonna get right into it. So what does quality math education look like to you? With so much going on in this country and every country around the world right now, I know teachers are working hard to figure out how to maintain quality. So I just want to start from that place of what does quality math education look like to you?
Well, that's a very interesting question. First of all, let me thank you for inviting me to be here today and for your very nice introduction. Quality mathematics education for me has to do with engaging students at all levels in a kind of mathematics in which they themselves are the producers of knowledge. So how that gets played out in a classroom, whether that classroom takes place face-to-face or it takes place through remote learning, can differ from place to place. That is to say, it might be that third graders in different parts of the country on any given day are working on different mathematical topics. That is, they may not be working on the same mathematical topic, but in order for their work and the engagement that they have with their teacher and with the curriculum materials to really indicate quality, I think it has to be one in which the students are asked to really come up with their understanding of what is logically necessary within any given mathematical situation, so that they are producing the knowledge through their conversations, through their interactions with curriculum materials, with concrete materials, or with cyber materials, on the internet, whether they're virtual manipulatives or not.
So the idea being that they are the ones that are building their own knowledge as they go.
They're building their own knowledge as they go. There's a very interesting series of papers by a British mathematics educator named David Hewitt, which he published in the late 90s. And in these papers, what he does is he indicates how the mathematics content is really divided, can be roughly divided into two parts. Those things which are, he calls arbitrary. And by arbitrary, he means those mathematical ideas or pieces of knowledge which are conventions, which one can't really invent them because they're handed down culturally. So for example, when we, if I asked you how many fingers am I holding up, the fact that you say that there are two, the word two is arbitrary. It's a linguistic convention that we have inherited for responding to the numerosity of this set of fingers. And so for him, what's arbitrary in mathematical content, that has to be given to children, that has to be given to students. Then he says, aside from arbitrary mathematical knowledge, there are things that are necessary. And by necessary in this sense, he means logically necessary. So, for example, if you take two circles, and if you have the circles, each circle go through the center of the other circle, you can imagine that you have these two circles. And the circumference of one circle passes through the center of the other. Then if you were to look at the points where the circles intersect, there's a point of intersection above and there's a point of intersection below, aside from the fact that the circumference of each circle is going through the center of the other circle. And then if you were to draw line segments from, let's say, the point of intersection above to the center of one circle, and then another line segment from the center of the first circle to the center of the second, and finally a third line segment that goes from the center of the second to that point of intersection above, now you can ask students the question, what kind of triangle is formed? And quality mathematics would be the situation where the students would have to now talk about what they see and what they wonder about in this picture, in this figure that's been drawn, either that they drew or the teacher drew. And the quality of mathematics would be for the students to see that each of those three line segments are equivalent, so that the kind of triangle that's drawn is an equilateral triangle. So the fact that we call those objects, those round objects, circles, that's arbitrary. But the idea that when you have these two intersecting circles and you draw these line segments, and the fact that the line segments are equivalent, and therefore you have an equilateral triangle, that's something the students can develop on their own. And that's not something that teachers need to tell students, but rather leave it to students to discover, leave it to them to figure out. That would be quality mathematics instruction for them.
So that's an example of a teacher really being guide, and also believing that students have the knowledge within them and the ability to build their own knowledge, which I think is a really important part of what we do, is leading with the belief that students do have that knowledge within them, just like we lead with the belief that all people have knowledge within them.
I think that's right. And I think that, that belief is a belief based on the idea that we know that students can look at things, that they have the possibility of making comparisons, that they can talk among themselves to argue about the length of those line segments and develop knowledge, that the figure that's drawn is in fact an equilateral triangle. And the student, that will remain with them because they've come up with it. They've come up with that idea.
Okay,
and so you're right, the teacher is a guide in that the teacher is providing, creating a classroom situation, a classroom climate where students receive from teachers the idea that the teacher knows that they can develop the mathematical ideas on their own.
Yeah, and I think what you kind of just touched on is that it creates the space for a student to feel like they've accomplished building that knowledge. And so when I kind of in my introduction, I talked a lot about the emotional part of math. So I'm still very math anxious, and I mentioned that because I know that I'm not alone. And I also still really believe that math education, quality math education, is what can change the world. So when I hear people say I'm not a math person, I think that's something that I used to say a lot, and have learned that but that's not something I should say, that I was wrong in saying that and thinking that. So I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about why was I wrong?
Well, I think in part, the conversation that we've just had is an indication. And that is, it might be that your experience in school was that teachers said, okay, here are the things that you have to know, and then provided a kind of laundry list of ideas and definitions and properties that you had to memorize.
Mhm.
And in that situation, mathematics can look quite boring, right? Because one asks the question, well, why should I memorize this? How does this relate to me? But when you have a different situation where you're given problems that are open-ended, where you can make decisions, then the mathematics becomes part of you. You're making the decision, and because you're making the decision, you are in the driver's seat. You're controlling what results you're going to obtain. And then, of course, you can debate the results that you come up with those of your classmates. And there may be different decisions that each group has made, which led to the results that they came up with. And that's the fun part, to try to understand how the decisions that we make influence the results we obtain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think when you have a class that's running that way, another opportunity it creates is for students to be able to listen to the thinking of their peers and to ask questions about that thinking. So a word I use a lot is like grafting. So you can see an example of someone's thinking and kind of graft what works for you from that kind of thinking onto your way of thinking and borrow. And that just seems that skill seems particularly important right now, of course, and also, in a room with a team of engineers who maybe have the technical skills and struggle with the communication skills in it. And I really think about, like, if we could work on how to build that communications skill set at the same time as the technical skill set and not see them as so disconnected, that would be very powerful.
I would absolutely agree. That would be quite powerful. And it's that kind of atmosphere that we want to see develop in classrooms so that students have that experience. And I think there's another element in what you're saying that I think is important, and that is recognizing that there are different ways in which students can contribute to the development of the mathematical knowledge in a group or in a classroom. So some students might have a developed way of communicating with others, but it might not be that student who comes up with the ideas for solving the problem. But if we recognize that both sets of skills are necessary in order to solve and communicate the mathematical ideas, to solve and communicate how one has come up with a solution to a problem, then we can validate the participation of students in the classroom and understand that different forms of participation all contribute to this group being able to come up with and communicate their understanding. So I think one of the things in classrooms that we need to really work on is finding ways to acknowledge these different forms of participation. And so that other students in the classroom can see that being able to communicate or being able to manage the technology, all of these different elements are part and parcel of a group of students being able to solve a problem. And that everyone who contributes is in fact an author of the solution of that problem. Yeah,
it's powerful. I think that just sounds a lot like the intersectionality of life to me, right? It's this idea that when you have a classroom of students or a classroom of any humans, right, they're all bring different things into the room with them. And that all of those lived experiences inform everything about kind of their way of thinking, their way of speaking, their way of acting, and they're all meaningful and valued. And especially like as a woman who used to say I'm not a math person, I think there's something in there too around creating a space for girls in a math class where they think, where they feel like their thinking is seen and valued, and encouraging them to participate in that way as well. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the ways, I mean, when we talk about anti-racist mathematics or anti-racist mathematics teaching, this is very important, because recognizing these different forms of participation and valuing and even privileging them helps for all students in the classroom to develop a sense of belonging, right? They're not isolated from the work of the classroom. It's not just one way of responding to a question or responding to a problem that's valued. For instance, it's not just the person who can answer the question the fastest that's seen as the bright one in class, right? But it may be actually someone who takes a long, circuitous route to solving a problem that could also be privileged and seen as providing a very valuable way of thinking about a problem. And so if we allow for these different forms of solving a problem and the different ways in which people participate, then we can break down barriers where only one form of participation is valued.
How do you think that math class can maybe help us tackle this idea between fitting in and belonging? Something that I think about a lot. And I think you kind of just touched on it a little bit there. It takes an intentional, there's an intentionality that comes with creating the feeling of belonging.
Right. So I think it has to be seen as one of the roles of teachers is to help everyone in the class feel valued and to feel like their way of working fits into the solving of mathematical problems and the development of mathematical ideas. And when we do that, then I think students will develop a sense of feeling valued, and therefore they develop a sense of belonging to the group, a sense of belonging to the classroom, and more importantly, belonging to the mathematical conversation, right? That their way of contributing is valued. And as that happens, they will begin to do the thing that you referred to earlier, and that is listen to each other and maybe clip some ideas of another student that you might find attractive and adopt that way of working or adopt that point of view, right? So we've got to help students learn to listen to each other, to recognize that it's not just what the teacher says or the teacher's way of solving a problem that they have to attend to, that they need to be able to talk about, critique, discuss how others in the classroom solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can create that atmosphere, then the sense of belonging, I think, will follow.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to teach kids how to receive those critiques as well. So like when I think about math class, again, very math anxious, I think like times tables and pressure to get the right answer and everything being right or wrong, very cut and dry that way. And I think that can create an environment where there's a lot of pressure around this idea of failure. And if we can shift that to be more of an environment about curiosity around failure and, okay, so what went wrong there? And I want to understand it. And let's really dig into that and understand the why. Because I just wonder if that can help over time to build up the emotional skill set where kids are able to learn how to let go of the ego and move towards difference and move towards discomfort to be able to
Uh-huh.
understand it more, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I think if we could find a way to do that at the same time as building critical thinking skills, we could really create change agents in a generation of kids.
Well, I'm sure you see that, understand that that is a developmental process. And somehow it would be wonderful if we had schools where teachers across grades are thinking hard about how in each of their classes they can help students over time develop these skills, develop this sense of awareness, so that we see that it's something that may not happen for all students in one school year, but if the school is organized in such a way that this becomes a conscious program of work on the part of teachers, that over time all students can develop their develop themselves, develop their strengths, and begin to work on things that they understand that they would like to work on, that might be at one stage a weakness, but later becomes something that they're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And these things take time. And I think we have to think about schooling as not just broken up into first grade, second grade, third grade, but recognize that over time, you know, through the teaching of mathematics, through the mathematical work that students do, it becomes the conscious effort of teachers to work on students' sense of their own mathematical identity and their sense of belonging and their sense of ownership over the mathematical ideas that they're expected to learn through having these quality mathematical sessions, right? These teaching sessions in which students really are developing the mathematical ideas for themselves. But for that to happen, of course, we also have to think about, well, what kinds of tasks are most appropriate for helping students to develop in these ways? What kinds of classroom resources must we have? What kinds of manipulative materials? What kinds of technology? I think these are largely open questions that need to be researched and understood. And there are things that, you know, if teachers could form sort of these communities where they are posing for themselves questions that they're interested in researching, questions that they're interested in finding answers to, and collaboratively working on developing methods for developing their answers to their questions, this would be very, very helpful. And I think it would also help students help teachers rather, see themselves as not mere implementers of some canned curriculum, but really developers of students.
Right.
In positive ways.
And I bet that would be motivating too, right? It's sort of that same thing that we were talking about with students before. When you have ownership over something and you feel like you have choice and you have the ability to decide which direction it goes, I think you are more motivated to dive in and make sure that it's good and see it through to the end and feel proud of it.
Right. Yeah. So this is something that we need to find ways of helping this be engendered in teachers, and find ways that even help school principals to see that maybe this might help the school function at a much higher level if teachers were allowed to exercise their autonomy.
Okay, so we have a question from the crowd. With remote virtual learning possibly becoming a crucial part of our near future, educators, students, parents alike, I would love to hear your thoughts and insight on how to possibly aid parents' contribution to the idea of fostering a mathematical collaboration among students and somewhat alleviate some of the mathematical anxiety. Thank you, Daniela, for your question, and I see you in mathematical anxiety.
Well, I take the question to be one of ways that we can help students who are having to learn remotely enter into some collaborative relationship with other students around their learning. Is that more or less the direction of the question?
Yes, how to possibly aid parents' contribution to the idea of fostering collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what can they do at home?
So I think that schools are going to have to be able to provide a platform that an online platform that fosters and that stimulates collaboration. And so we need a platform where small groups of students can be, let's say, in a kind of chat room where they may have a chat window so that they can send messages back and forth. And they may have another window that allows them to, a kind of whiteboard that allows them to work on mathematical problems. And maybe this whiteboard could be something like Desmos, or has the tools of GeoGebra available to them, so that they could, with these tools, create geometric shapes or graph algebraic expressions and functions, and where the kinds of problems that they're asked to resolve are ones that are really group-worthy problems. So they're not mere exercises, right? But rather they're problems where it really would take a group of individuals, a small group of students, it would allow them to put forth their ideas, to test their ideas with the GeoGebra window or the Desmo window that they have available to them. They can chat back and forth. So they need to have an environment that allows for this kind of that forces this kind of collaboration. And the kinds of problems that they're asked to work on have to be group-worthy problems. They need to be problems that have, as it were, that allows students of any ability to make some progress on it, but also allows students who have a domain of some interesting mathematical machinery to also make progress on. So we need to have the technological tool for the collaboration, and then the mathematical tasks that are group worthy, that engage students in working together within the environment.
Yeah.
Now, there is such an environment. There's something called virtual math teams, which is freely available on the internet, where students or parents can sign students up. And in this environment, other groups of students could come in and work in these small chat rooms. And they will have available to them the kinds of tools that I've been talking about. A chat window, and then a window where they have access to GeoGebra or Desmos.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that we all definitely need certain things to be able to create a quality learning environment. And we're just about out of time for today. So I wanted to mention before we head out that in upcoming live chats, we're going to be talking about how quality education is actually not in the United States Constitution. So in the United States, there's kind of an interesting conversation around the fact that we all have a right to a free education, but the quality component of that education is not included. And I think it's a really, really important conversation for us to be having and for everybody to be paying attention to. So thank you, Arthur, very much for your time.
Well, thank you. I just want to say that we need to build a movement around insisting that there's legislation that would help school districts to implement quality education.
Yep. So we're trying to do. If anybody wants to join the movement, come here. So on that note, we're going to leave everybody with this. So just tune in to what's going on and remember to wear your mask and math on, because math is what can change the world and math is what can change all of this. Starts with students. Thanks.
Thank you, Ali.